Chairman Stokes has gavelled this session to order for the morning. Here's Chairman Stokes.
At the outset of today's hearing, I'd like to make a couple of observations. During the course of our hearings on 2 occasions, we have had individuals who have attempted to disrupt the proceedings. And on those occasions, it has been necessary for the chair to order those persons to be removed from the room. The chair would like to make it clear that these are congressional hearings, that they are to be conducted with a certain amount of dignity, and accordingly, the chair will not tolerate any disruption whatsoever of these hearings. We hope that all individuals will observe the practices of the House and not cause this type of action to have to be taken during the course of these hearings. Secondly, this morning's witness, at the time that the witness is brought into the room, will ask that all individuals remain seated until after the witness has been brought into the room and seated at the witness table. And then again, when the witness leaves the room, we'll ask that all persons remain in their seats until the witness has been escorted from the room. Professor Blakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marina Prushakova was born on July 17, 1941, in the Russian village of Malostov, near the White Sea. She was raised, for the most part, by her grandmother. In August 1959, Marina moved to the city of Minsk, and in March 1961, at a dance, she met a young American who called himself Alec. 6 weeks later, Marina and Lee Harvey Oswald were married. It is fair, therefore, to presume that in the succeeding years, Marina was the closest person to Lee Harvey Oswald. The Oswalds remained in Russia until June 1962, at which time they moved to the United States. They went to Dallas, the home of Lee's mother and a brother. In the spring of 1963, they moved to New Orleans, then back to Dallas in September. After Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy and then shot to death by Jack Ruby, Mrs. Oswald testified a total of 4 times before the Warren Commission. All of her testimony was in closed session. In 1965, Marina Oswald married Kenneth Porter. In October of 1977, Priscilla Johnson McMillan published her Marina and Lee, a book in which Marina cooperated so as, quote, to speak through her more capable words the things the people should know, close quote. There will be 4 general areas of questioning of Mrs. Porter this morning. First, Russia. Second, Dallas from June 1962 through April 1963. Third, New Orleans from April 1963 to September 1963. Fourth, Dallas from September 1963 to November 1963. It would be appropriate now, Mr. Chairman, to call Mrs. Porter.
Committee calls Mrs. Porter.
Marina Oswald Porter is entering the room accompanied by a battalion of marshals and police. She's wearing a beige skirt and is approaching the witness chair. She's a diminutive woman, quite different than the photographs we've all seen of her. sort of fair hair, not quite blonde, short, cropped around the face.
Please stand. Raise your right hand to the Lord. Solemnly swear the testimony you give before this committee, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Chair recognizes counsel for the committee, Mr. James McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, would you please state your full name?
Marina Nikolaevna Porter.
And were you one time known as Marina Oswald?
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Porter, are you accompanied today by an attorney?
Yes.
And would you please have your attorney identify himself for the record?
My name is James Hamilton, and I practice law in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Mrs. Porter, when and where
Mr. Hamilton was one of the staff members of the Watergate Committee.
I was born in the Soviet Union in the city of Archangel on July 17, 1941.
And with whom did you live during your early childhood years?
With my mother, stepfather, and my grandmother.
Mrs. Porter, could you move the microphone a little closer to you?
Okay.
Thank you. And where were these early years spent? What city?
Archangel.
When did you move to Minsk?
When I was 19 years old, I believe.
And why did you go there?
I went to live with my aunt and uncle in order to work in that city.
And what were their names, your aunt and uncle?
It was Ilya and Valentina Prusakov.
And your uncle, was he known to you as Uncle Vanya?
No, Uncle Ilya.
And where was he employed?
He was working for MVD in the city of Minsk.
And what is that, the MVD?
It's the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
And what did he do at the MVD?
I do not know what he exactly did, except I know he has a profession as an engineer.
Did he ever discuss his job with you?
No.
Did he ever discuss his job at home?
No.
And he was stationed in Minsk, or worked in Minsk. Did you ever study English in the Soviet Union?
Me? No.
You never studied in school?
No.
Mrs. Porter, when did you first meet Lee Harvey Oswald?
I do not recall the exact month, day of the month, but it was in 1961.
Do you recall whether it was in March of 1961?
February or March.
And how were you introduced to him?
By some mutual friends, a group of students that I knew.
Can you recall who introduced you?
No.
And where were you when this introduction took place?
It was at the city dance hall in Minsk.
Can you describe for us as best you can your recollection of when you did meet him, what you were doing and who brought you together?
Well, I was invited by a friend of mine, medical student, to attend this medical students' dance ball. And when I came there, it was a group of students, and one of them was Lee, and some mutual friend introduced me to him.
Can you recall who that mutual friend was?
No, I don't.
Can you recall what you talked about at this first meeting?
Well, just typical young people, everyday, routine talk about the weather. And I do not really recall what it was.
Do you recall how long this initial meeting lasted?
About 2-3 hours.
In other words, you continued to talk with Lee Oswald for 2 to 3 hours?
No, I didn't. When he asked to dance, we just talked very little.
Did he tell you he was an American?
No. Not at that, not during the dancing, no.
At this time, you were speaking in Russian together?
Yes, he spoke with accent, so I assume he was maybe from another state, which is customary in Russia. People from another state do speak with accent because they do not speak Russian, they speak different languages.
So when you say another state, you mean another Russian state?
Yes, like Estonia, Lithuania, or something like that.
Did you suspect at all that he was an American?
No, not at all.
Did he tell you where he worked?
Not at that moment.
Can you recall the first time when you and Lee Oswald had a discussion where he told you about himself? In other words, when was the first time you had a discussion with Oswald where he told you where he was from, told you something about himself?
Well, after the dance, we have been invited for tea or whatever, for a little gathering at somebody's house, one of the friends, and the majority of the group went there, and then I found out that Lee was from America. And of course, it was lots of curious people asking questions about his country, and I was one of them.
Did he say why he left the United States? Did he tell you or anyone in your presence?
I do not recall that.
Do you recall asking him why he was in Russia?
I do not remember if I asked him in that particular evening.
Did he tell you where in the United States he was from?
No.
Can you recall when he first expressed any political views to you?
Not really. Not really. The politics really weren't discussed in the sense that comparing two countries, which one is better and which one is not.
Did he ever tell you he was a communist?
No.
Or a Marxist?
No.
Or a Trotskyite?
No.
Before or after you got married? Can you recall what political views he was expressing to you then?
Well, the political views never have been emphasized in relationships at all. After you got married, and you got married at the end of April in 1962? Yes.
When did he, again I'll ask you, when did he first tell you the reason why he left the United States and came to Russia?
Well, I cannot pinpoint exact date, but if I recall way back, in one conversation, so altogether, it came clearly that, pardon me, I forgot, I lost the question.
When do you recall he first told you why he left the United States to come to Russia?
So anyway, he said that being young, he just wanted to see how, he read some about Soviet Union, and he wanted to see for himself what it's like, life looked like in Soviet Union.
Do you recall him expressing dissatisfaction with the United States?
No, I do not recall. Not at that moment. Not at the beginning of the relationship. That he was saying something for it or against the United States.
You're saying at the beginning of your relationship you don't recall him saying anything for or against the United States?
No.
When do you recall him first expressing opinions against the United States?
After a few months after the marriage, when I found out that he is wishing to return to his homeland, then he started complaining about the bad weather in Russia and how eager he will be to go back. So,
Can you recall Oswald expressing at this time, soon after your marriage, but prior to your return to the United States, do you recall him expressing any views about the U.S. and its political system, either pro or con, for or against?
no.
And specifically regarding John Kennedy?
What I learned about John Kennedy, it was only through Lee, practically, and he always spoke very complimentary about the president. He was very happy when John Kennedy was elected.
And you're saying while you were still in the Soviet Union, he was very complimentary about John Kennedy?
Yes, he was, seemed like he was boasting about how young and attractive the president of the United States is.
Can you recall during this time when he ever expressed any contrary views about Kennedy?
Never.
Did you ever ask him directly, why did you come to the USSR?
I probably did.
Can you recall what his answer was?
Well, he said that he was always curious about the Soviet Union, and he bought tourist visa. I asked him how did he got in the United States, and he said, I mean, to Soviet Union, I'm sorry. And he said that he bought visa, or whatever you call it, asked for permit to enter the country through Finland as a tourist, and then he asked to stay.
Did he ever talk about defecting from the United States to the Soviet Union?
What do you mean by that?
Defect, in other words, renouncing, or at least ostensibly renouncing United States citizenship to come to the Soviet Union?
Well, during the marriage, I found out about that he did give up his American citizenship and was afraid that it would be very difficult to come back for that reason, or they would not permit him to come back.
And how did you find out about this?
I do believe that he told me.
Before you married him, were you aware of this defection situation?
I don't remember if I knew that. Oh, you mean before we were married?
Yes.
No.
Did Lee Oswald ever discuss with you the various trips he made to the American embassy when he was trying to defect? This would have been before you even met, but did he ever tell you about the different times he went to the United States Embassy in Moscow?
No, he did not.
What was your first impression of Lee Oswald when you met him?
He was polite, neatly dressed, very courteous, well-mannered. He was quite attractive.
Did you notice whether he was in the company of other individuals, any friends, the night of the dance?
Yes, he was.
In the book, Marina and Lee by Priscilla Johnson, it says that you first met Lee on March 17th, 1961, and on March 25th, a few days later, you received a call to visit him at the hospital because he was sick. Would you comment on that? Why did you go? You had only met him at a dance.
Well, my aunt took the message, and she said this, somebody with the accent called and they left a message for you to come over. So, of course, I had sympathy for a person being in the hospital. Why not to pay a visit? It was just a courteous thing to do.
Even though he was only a casual acquaintance at that time?
Yes. I did like him.
Pardon?
I did like him, so.
And what did you talk about on this occasion in the hospital, in the hall?
What do you talk about in the hospital?
Well, can you recall?
Just ask how you feel and what had been done. for him over there, and if he has plenty of food to eat and whatever.
Now, you knew him for barely 6 weeks, and you got married on April 30th, 1961.
Yes.
Would you consider that wasn't that a rather hasty move, hasty decision after 6 weeks of knowing an individual?
Not when your age that I was, you don't think it is.
At that time, did you know anything about him, about his background?
Not very much, except that he's American.
Did you know whether he had a family in the United States?
I do not recall when I found out that he has brother and mother.
At that time when you married him, did you know whether his mother was alive?
No.
Again, referring to the book Marina and Lee, in that book, it stated that you didn't know that Oswald had been in contact with the American Embassy since February of 61, 2.5 months prior to your getting married, when he expressed a desire to return to the United States, starting back in February 1961. Is that true? That you did not have any idea that he had been in touch with the American Embassy?
No, that was a condition of me accepting his proposal, because I asked him before marriage if you ever be able or will come back to the United States, and he said no. So I assumed that he will be living in the Soviet Union all the time.
At that time, what was your attitude toward the United States?
Well, I did not know that much about the United States, but I always was curious to find out about. I did not have any hostility toward the United States.
When was the first time you learned that Oswald wanted to return to the United States?
Sometime after we were married. A few months later, maybe.
You say a few months?
Yes.
Can you recall how you learned?
No, I don't. Please do not forget that it was so many years ago.
I understand. But can you try to remember how you're a Russian citizen, and the very first time that you learned that your husband wants to leave and take you to the United States, that would be a significant event. I would assume it might have been even a shocking event to you, to think that you might leave your homeland. So
yes, it was. It wasn't a very easy decision for me to make. What should I do? Should I follow him or should I stay at home?
But the question was, how do you, as best you can, recall how you learned that Oswald wanted to go back to the United States?
Well, as far as I remember right now, I think he just asked me one day or one evening, what would I think if he come back to the United States? Would I go with him? Of course, I told him, so wherever he go, I should too, and I will back him out.
And right around the time when you first learned that he wanted to go back to the United States, can you recall whether there was any change in his attitude toward the United States, politically?
I do not remember. I didn't think it was, because he just wanted to go back home, and that was the main concern of his.
During your time in Russia together, what were Lee Oswald's political views?
To tell you the truth, I do not know, because I do not ever, I don't know, then at least, I wasn't interested in politics. I did not discuss that as a fact. I maybe overheard conversation between him and somebody else, an article in the newspaper, what they think about certain events at this time.
Did he discuss politics with you?
Not much, but every time something around, like somebody maybe will be unfair, make an unfair statement toward the United States, he will defend the United States.
Where did Oswald work?
He worked at the radio factory nearby our apartment.
And what did he do there?
I do believe maybe he was some kind of mechanic. I really don't know what kind of job exactly he did.
Did he ever discuss his job?
Only thing he said that he did not like it very much.
Can you
It was
recall?
just a manual labor.
It was manual labor.
Yes.
Did he come home in the evening with dirty hands, dirty clothes?
The first time he did after he came home, he went and took a shower, right away. So, not really dirty, no.
On subsequent nights, I mean, do you recall whether he would come home, you say he did manual labor, were his hands rough and dirt under the fingernails, and generally, did it look like he was doing that kind of work?
Well, not really.
How about his clothes? Did he have a special set of work clothes?
I don't remember. I think he did, but I would not recall exactly.
Who were his friends during this time in Minsk?
Well, he really did not have very many friends. I do recall one young man working with him. His name was Pavel Golovachov, and he was around our house quite a lot, and they spoke English. So for this young gentleman, it was a good practice.
Was this individual Pavel Golovachov?
Yes.
Would you consider him Lee's closest friend?
I think so.
When was the first time you met him?
I do not remember if I met him before we were married or shortly after he came by the house.
Did he work with Lee at the radio factory?
Or I even went out that he was invited to the wedding as a friend of Lee.
How often, do you recall when you first met him?
Pardon me?
When did you first meet him, Pavel Golovachov?
Well, like I said earlier, I do remember maybe it was when he was invited to the wedding on April 30th.
Okay, that was the first time you met him.
I assume by now.
Okay. Did you get to know him well?
Fairly well.
Did he come over to your apartment?
Yes, he was a very nice boy.
Do you know where he lived? Did he live in the general vicinity of your apartment?
I don't think so. I think he lived somewhere in town, but I don't know where. Not very far away.
Do you know whether Oswald and Mr. Golovachov ever talked about politics together?
I really don't know because they spoke in English.
They spoke in English?
Yes.
And why did they do that?
Because Pavel Golovachov was studying English language, and not very many people you can speak the language and with. So he said it was a good practice for him being around Lee.
Do you think this was one of the reasons that he befriended Oswald to perfect his language ability?
It could be, and he was interested about the United States, for sure, and they talked about, compared the life.
Do you know how they met, how these two individuals met?
No, I don't.
Have you ever heard from this individual since you left Minsk, Mr. Golovachov?
I do believe when we moved back to the United States, we did receive some letters from Soviet Union, but I do not remember exactly from whom. That's possible.
Generally, what kind of person was he, Mr. Golovachov?
He was quiet. bright and honest and fine person.
Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Mr. Chairman, I'm finished with this line of questioning for this phase of this morning.
Thank you, counsel. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Judge Pryor. For such time as you may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Porter, your English now seems to be very good.
Thank you.
But if you have any trouble in understanding me or understanding the question, please ask, and I shall try to put it in another form which you can understand better. I would like to continue with a few questions in the period of your early life in Russia with Lee Harvey Oswald. I might say for the record at this time that Mrs. Porter has given several depositions to the committee, and they will be made a part of the final report. And I think that may explain why we will not ask every conceivable question about this period in your life that we might think of. When you first married Lee Harvey Oswald, he had his own apartment. Did you consider that unusual that a single person in the Soviet Union who had a menial job would have his own apartment?
Yes, it is kind of unusual, but foreigners in Soviet Union usually treated a little bit better than their own citizens. They pampered maybe more.
In other words, it would have been unusual for a Soviet citizen in his situation to have a single apartment.
Yes, but he had more privileges as a foreigner.
Was the type of privileges he had and the type of apartment he had like those that other foreigners would have had?
I do not know because I cannot compare to other foreigners.
But it was the practice that foreigners had better housing accommodations.
That's what I heard.
Than Soviet citizens. When you were living in the apartment, did Lee ever have visitors whose identity was unknown to you? That is, did anyone visit you apart from your normal friends? Someone who was a stranger to you?
No.
Was Lee secretive during this time? Do you understand what I mean?
I think so. For example, he will be writing something on a piece of paper and it will be in English, and if I ask him what it was, he would not talk about.
Was he devious by that? I mean, would he say, for example, that he was going one place and you learned later that he'd gone to another place?
I do not understand the question. What devious means, I don't know.
Perhaps the word deceptive. Was he deceptive to you? Did he say to you he would do one thing and you later learned he did another thing?
Not that I know of. Not at that particular period of my life.
At this period of your life, did he ever act violently in front of you?
No.
Did he ever mention to you that he had contact with the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency?
No.
In your deposition, one of the depositions you gave the committee, I believe you stated that you both assumed that the KGB was observing you. What is the basis for that conclusion?
Well, from Russian newspaper, you assume that they don't print exactly what's going on in the United States and act like they maybe mistrust them. So it wasn't surprising for them to keep eye on a foreigner.
Have you personally ever had any contact with the KGB or the MVD?
I lived in an apartment with lots of people. The neighbors were working for the same, how you call it? Same, not organization, but they worked for MVD. There were different professions, doctors and whatever. And of course I know them as a neighbor.
But as far as you know, you had no contact with the KGB or the MVD on any sort of official business basis.
Did you say official? Would you please repeat your question? Did you say official?
As I understood your answer, you stated that some of your neighbors may have been connected with the KGB or the MVD.
I know they work for it.
Work for them. But that your contact with them was as neighbors.
Yes, and sometime in my life I had to go over there and talk to the men in MVD when I was applying for a visa to enter to leave Soviet Union.
Did you and Lee think that your apartment was bugged?
Yes, we did.
Why did you expect a bug in your apartment?
Well, because I do not even know if bug will take any electricity, but electric meter will be running when you turn all electrical appliances off, and will be moving. So we did not know what the reason for that was, except we assume we had been watched. And another assumption is that it's quite customary in Soviet Union to keep eye on somebody.
So that you say it was quite customary to bug foreigners in this situation?
I'm not really making that exact statement. I might heard gossips about, and I knew that they do watch foreigners.
Did Lee ever tell you why he thought he was allowed to stay in the Soviet Union?
I do not recall if he said why. I do not recall right now.
Why did you think he was allowed to stay there? Since he was uneducated and was not a scientist or not in that category of foreigners whom would normally be welcome to the Soviet Union.
When I found out later during the marriage that he gave up his American citizenship and asked for anyone asked Russian for political assignment, so that was my thinking at the time for the reason.
Did Lee have a rifle, a gun, a rifle while he was living in Minsk?
Yes, he did.
Did he hunt with it? If so, how often did he go hunting?
Not during our marriage, he didn't, but he did belong to a hunting club, and he said that he did previous to our marriage.
And did I understand you to say that after your marriage he did not go hunting?
Not that I know, I remember right now. I don't recall that at all.
Did he often take the rifle out and clean it or look at it or examine it?
Yeah, occasionally he did that.
How were you employed when you first met Lee?
I do not hear you, sorry.
What was your work? How were you employed when you first met Lee Oswald?
I was a pharmacist and working at the drugstore in a nearby hospital.
You mentioned earlier that after you were married, you and Lee thought the apartment was bugged. Did you think that your mail or Lee's mail was being opened?
We assumed that it was. The letters are censored. They come from foreign countries.
Did Lee ever say anything about his mail being tampered with? That is, that an envelope had been opened and resealed, for example?
I believe he did.
Can you recall anything about that occasion?
No, I don't, but since you mentioned it does ring a bell that maybe it did happen on one or few occasions.
Did you feel that you and Lee were being watched? That is, did you see any strange men outside of your apartment who appeared to be loitering near your apartment?
I don't remember right now.
Were you a member of the Komsomol, do I pronounce that right, the Communist Youth Movement?
Yes, I was.
How long were you active in that
I really, may I explain myself? I really wasn't active at all. It's very customary in Soviet Union when people at the job belong to this organization. It's a patriotic thing to do, and I have been not exactly forced, but have been reminded that it would be more ethical if I do belong to this organization, so I'd keep refusing it. So finally they said you don't have to do anything if you just pay your dues, so that's what I did for many months. But I never attended meetings at all, except at the end when they finally discharged me from the organization. I had to attend that meeting.
So that, if I understand you, you were saying it was customary to join this organization at your place of work.
Yes.
And that it was social pressure which compelled you.
Yes, you have to kind of go with the crowd.
And you did, members did pay their dues regularly, and you paid your dues regularly. Yeah. Did Lee ever talk about United States politics after you were married? That is, did he talk about officials of the United States, such as the President or the Secretary of State, or did he talk about the policies of the United States government?
If he did, it wasn't, he wasn't talking to me about, because I wasn't really interested in his political view or anybody's political view.
Specifically, did he ever talk about President Kennedy?
Whatever he said about President Kennedy, it was only good always.
What was your attitude about the United States at this time?
In Russia, you mean?
Yes, when you were first living in Russia.
Well, seeing few American tourists and city of Leningrad, I learned that the life is not as bad in the United States as it's printed in newspaper. So, of course, every Russian is very curious, not every Russian, but majority of young people very curious about Western world.
From Lee's conversation, did you think he wanted to become a citizen of the Soviet Union at this time?
Once Lee, I believe he applied for He sent a letter to university in Moscow, and he was very, very disappointed when he was refused to become a student of this university. And I think that maybe was a changing point about him staying or leaving. Definitely. The Soviet Union, he was very disappointed that I do assume that he might have stayed longer or maybe forever if he was granted permission to become a student.
When he was not given that permission, his attitude then changed toward becoming a
Well, I
Soviet
speculate right now. I thought maybe that was the reason. At least I assumed then that he did want to come to Soviet Union to get education.
Were you surprised when Lee said he wanted to leave the Soviet Union and come to the United States?
Yes, I was, because he told me that he would not be able to or really wanted to.
Were you pleased that he wanted to come to the United States?
Not really. Nothing against the United States, but it was a very measured decision for me to make. I did not know that much about the United States, so to leave everything behind was quite hard.
Did you ever suspect that Lee might be a spy of some sort for either the Soviet KGB or for the United States CIA?
It crossed my mind sometime. I'm sorry to admit that.
I'm sorry,
It did cross my mind sometime during our life in Russia, yes. Because he would be sitting with those papers and writing something in English, and I don't know, maybe he was making reports to somebody and didn't want me to know.
When it crossed your mind, did you think he was a spy for the United States or for the Soviet Union?
For the United States.
And you based that on the fact that he often was writing notes in English which you did not understand?
Yes.
Did you ever learn later what those notes were or the writing he was doing?
I learned about that after Lee died. That's what they call Lee Harvey Oswald diary or something like that. That's what it was.
So that all of the writing on which you based your thought that he could have been a spy later turned out to be the diary that he was writing?
Yes, sir.
I mentioned earlier the Komsomol, the Communist Youth Organization. I believe you were expelled from that organization. Would you explain to us why that happened?
Excuse me, I did not understand the end of your question.
The Communist Youth Organization, Komsomol, if I pronounce it correctly, which you joined when you were working at your place of employment. Later, you were expelled, that is, removed from that organization, kicked out, we might say, in this country. Would you explain to us how that happened?
After I married Lee, the atmosphere at work was changing. I mean, I was aware then more so who is my friend and who is not. Few people were kind of act quite cold towards me, and the pressure at work was put that I sometimes felt like I was a traitor, a married foreigner. I should not belong to this organization.
So that the fact that you were married to a foreigner was the principal reason that you
I believe
left
so.
the organization. When you were in the Soviet Union at this period, did you ever hear President Kennedy speak over the radio?
Yes, I have. Did you ask me if I heard or Lee did?
First, I will ask if you heard.
Yes, I did. But of course, I could not understand what he was talking about.
The gentleman stand for just 1 second. I just thought it might be worthwhile. Mrs. Porter, the
we have a recorded vote on, and if you saw everyone leave up here all at once, they're just going over to vote and will be coming right back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was Lee with you when you heard President Kennedy speak over the radio?
As far as I recall right now, I think he was, because he's the one who tuned the radio on the right station. I believe it was through BBC or Voice of America, something like that. It wasn't broadcasted through Moscow or any Russian channels.
So that Lee was the one who turned the radio to the channel to hear the president?
We had the shortwave radio, I believe that's what you call when you can listen to the foreign stations.
WSCR Amherst.
Your reaction, and what was Lee's reaction to hearing the president speak over the radio?
Well, I kept bugging him, what is he saying, what is he saying? And he just told me to hush up, not to interrupt him.
So he told you to hush up?
Yeah.
Did he ever make any comment about the president's speech?
I do believe that Pavel Gorbachev might have been present at this time, so they really discussed that between two of them. And, of course, Lee's attitude maybe was that, me being a woman, what do you know about politics, so I really do not recall what the comments were.
When did you first learn that Lee wanted to leave the Soviet Union?
A few months after we were married. I do not recall exact month. Could be May or June probably, likely.
And I believe you testified that you were surprised at that. When you left Russia, did you expect to return to Russia?
No, I burned all my bridges behind me.
So that you did not expect that you would return either with Lee or alone?
No.
What was the reaction of your family to your leaving the Soviet Union?
Well, they were very, very upset for me making the decision of leaving the country. My uncle was worried about the farewell of his family, and he was even afraid that he might lose a job on that account, being related to me.
When you arrived in New York from the Soviet Union, did Lee bring his rifle with him?
I don't remember. I don't think he can go through the customs with the rifle.
You did go through the customs in New York?
Yes.
And as far as you know, no rifle was found or no comment was made about a rifle at that time?
Not that I know.
Did Lee seem pleased to be back in the United States?
I think so. He was a little bit disappointed when no reporters show up to greet him at the airport, because he told me there's going to be a whole bunch of them.
Before you left Russia, did Lee say where you would be going in the United States?
Yes, he said that he has a brother living in Texas, in Dallas, or Fort Worth.
Was that why you were going to Texas?
Yes, sir.
Because of his relatives living there?
Yes.
Did he mention any other place in the United States where he might like to live?
Oh, he also told me he has relatives in New Orleans, so we might live there sometime.
When you arrived in Texas, who met you at the airport?
Robert Oswald and his family.
Did you meet any of Lee's friends in Fort Worth, apart from his brother?
I don't recall. I don't think so.
Where were you staying in Fort Worth?
We stayed for a while with his brother.
While you were there, Any friends call Lee on the telephone?
Not that I know of.
Do you recall whether he called anyone to say he was back in the United States?
Well, I did not speak English at the time, sir. If he used the phone or somebody called for somebody, I wouldn't know about that, unless he told me.
At that time, you and Lee conversed, discussed only in Russian.
Yes.
At this time, when he first returned in Texas, did he talk about politics, or did he mention President Kennedy again at any time?
Off and on, but it always was complimentary or something good.
Did he talk in general about any other politicians or public figures in the United States at this time?
Not that I recall, no.
Thank you. I will yield at this time, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. McDonnell for the next area of questions.
Thank you, Mr. McDonnell. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Porter, I'd just like to backtrack just for a couple of questions in the Russian phase of our questioning. During the time you mentioned earlier, because of the way he was writing in English in a book, that you suspected perhaps he was a spy or something of that nature. Did he ever act suspiciously in any other way? In other words, did he ever go out at night, meet individuals unknown to yourself, act in any other manner that you would...
No, it's customary in Russia to go for a walk after dinner, and if I want to, I can go alone, or he might go visit some friends, and I took his word for it. He said if he goes see Pavel for a while, that's just fine with me.
Mrs. Porter, did you and your husband, did you have any Cuban friends in Minsk?
Not friends, but I think Lee met some Cuban students that were going to university in Minsk.
Do you recall their names?
I do believe he mentioned some names, but I do not recall them at all.
And how well did you know them?
I did not know them at all.
How well did your husband know them?
Oh, they might just walk on the street and talk about something, that's what he said.
You say they came over to your apartment?
No.
No. Did they ever?
Not that I recall.
Do you know how often Lee met with them?
No, I don't.
You say they were students at the university?
Yes.
And Lee worked in a radio plant?
Yes.
How did they come to meet?
Well, the city is not that big. It's a population only 500,000 people, and it's has a main street where people, meet sometime, for a cup of coffee, the square or something like a park or something like that.
Did Lee tell you that he had met some Cuban students?
I think he did, yes.
How did he say? What did he say?
Well, please don't, forgive me for saying I do not remember, but it's 15 years ago. It's a long time ago. I do not remember the details really right now.
Can you recall, whether on the first time he mentioned meeting some Cuban students, whether he seemed pleased by the fact that he had met some?
Well, he would make comments, for example, like, well, I do not like Russian winter, so that the Cuban students, they're freezing too, Or maybe mention that they weren't very happy to study there. They had been sent by new government. And they don't have the freedom as they used to in their own homeland.
Did he, at this time, did he speak of Cuba? Did Lee speak of Cuba in favorable terms? Did he talk about Cuba at all?
Yes.
What did he say?
He did like Fidel Castro, and at the time so did I. because he was presented to the Russian public as a very good fellow. So at the time, also, all young people were curious about new government in Cuba and how they will do it, and so he was very appealing at the time.
What did Lee say about Fidel?
He said that he did like him as a leader very well.
Do you know how often, after Lee met the Cuban students, do you recall whether he met with them frequently or met with them at all?
Well, let's assume maybe once a week. Sometime, maybe he doesn't see them for 2 weeks and stumble over, or maybe have special date and they go to the movie or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Where were they meeting? Do you know?
Usually on the street or in the park somewhere, or on Main Street.
Do you know in what language they were speaking?
Well, I really don't know how did they communicate. It never occurred to me. Mm-hmm. Maybe the students spoke English, could they?
Okay, is it your...
Lee did not speak Spanish, as far as I know. So I assume maybe they spoke English. I hate to speculate on that. Mm-hmm. I'll check. Excuse me. No. The Cubans do speak Spanish. Maybe they spoke English. Oh.
Just so we're clear on the point.
Yes.
Did you ever meet the Cuban students?
No, so I do not know how they communicate with each other. That's the thing.
And for over how long a period of time did Lee meet with these students?
Maybe a few months.
And your testimony is that, as far as you know, they met maybe once a week?
I assume, because when Lee left and he said he's going to see somebody and he stumbled over them or seen them somewhere sometime, maybe he tell me, sometime he's not. Mm-hmm. So I do not know.
During this time in the Soviet Union, did Lee Harvey Oswald ever demonstrate any violent tendencies, any antisocial tendencies, either to you personally or in general?
Well, he would lose temper a few times, but he was pretty good at controlling it. You know, naturally, during marriage, husband and wife do fuss sometimes.
But it's your testimony that his behavior was not...
He wasn't really violent, no.
And you're saying not out of the ordinary?
Pardon?
Nothing unusual about his
no.
behavior at that time?
No.
Mrs. Porter, going back again to your first few days and weeks in Texas in 1962, when did you first, well, this may not apply just to them, when did you first learn about Oswald's mother, Marguerite?
I learned about her in Soviet Union because Lee was corresponding with her.
I'm sorry, I didn't...
After we were married, Lee and his mother corresponded with each other.
And you were not aware of her before you got married?
No.
And what was your reaction when Lee told you that his mother was in fact alive?
What was my reaction? Well, I really didn't have any reaction. It's wonderful that he had a mother.
Well, except wasn't there a point when he told you that he completely covered up the fact that he had a mother?
Well, I really do not recall what my reaction was at the time.
Did you think him to be devious at that time? In other words, you find out after you got married that his mother was alive, and he never mentioned her beforehand to you.
Well, it was kind of strange, behavior, isn't it?
When did you first meet her?
After we arrived to Fort Worth. Or when, you said?
Yes, when?
In June, I believe, of 62.
And was Lee present?
I don't recall the circumstances of the meeting.
Did you know George de Mohrenschildt?
Did I know him? Yes.
How did you know him?
He was one of Russian friends that we have right here, Russian immigrants.
When did you first meet him?
I do believe in 1962, shortly after arrival to the United States.
And what were the circumstances of your first meeting with George de Mohrenschildt? First of all, where were you?
I assume right now, as I remember right now, I think we had been invited for lunch or dinner at some Russian friend's house, and lots of Russian people did come, and that's how we met.
Do you recall whose house you were at?
I do believe Anna Miller, but...
Anna Miller?
Anna Miller.
And
that's how I remember right now, as I met George de Mohrenschildt. Maybe I met him, maybe he came to our house. I do not recall right now exactly.
Well, do you recall on the first occasion you met him, was his wife present with him?
I don't remember.
Was Lee present when you met?
It probably was.
Was that also the first time that Lee ever met de Mohrenschildt?
I don't remember really. If we met him together or he met him previously. I do not recall right now at all.
What did Lee say about George de Mohrenschildt?
He did like him very much, so did I.
Did he like him from the first time you met him? In other words, is it, in remembering back, did it appear that the first time you met him was the first time Lee had met him as well?
I don't remember how we met him together or somehow separate. But I know for a fact we both liked the man very well.
What did Lee say about him?
Good fellow George, I guess.
Why did Lee like him so much?
Well, most people who knew George, like he has a very vivacious personality, always cheerful and joking. He was very pleasant to be around.
Did he like Lee?
Well, I assume at the time that he did.
When they spoke, did they speak in Russian or in English?
In Russian and English both.
Did Lee and de Mohrenschildt ever talk politics in your presence?
They probably have.
Can you recall any such conversations?
No.
Can you recall in your presence whether George de Mohrenschildt and Lee ever spoke about President Kennedy?
If I say right now that yes, I do, they probably talked about it and you asked me about the details, which I cannot remember. But yes, the name John Kennedy was mentioned in the conversation.
Can you recall in what context? In other words, were they speaking favorably of Kennedy?
I think so. Well, I recall that George de Mohrenschildt told me once that when he was younger, he knew Jackie Kennedy before she was married to John Kennedy, when she was a young lady, and spoke very nicely about her.
And how about Lee's views at the time? Do you recall whether they were ever engaged in argument?
I do not recall ever hearing Lee talking badly about John Kennedy or Kennedy family.
In some of these discussions Lee had with de Mohrenschildt, well, do you recall what de Mohrenschildt's opinion of the Soviet Union was?
Well, George Mansell always joke a lot, and you really don't know if that was his real opinion or just a joke. So, of course, he was curious how things changed since he... I didn't really know if he was living there or was born there, and I do not remember. But he was curious about life in Soviet Union, yes.
After Lee got back to the United States, what was his opinion then of the Soviet Union?
After he came back to the United States? Well, he was very glad that he back home, at least at the beginning. I do not recall him saying that he was sorry he left Soviet Union.
Do you recall that he was sorry or that he was not sorry that he left?
He was not sorry.
When Lee first got to Fort Worth, you first went there when you went back to Texas, was he contacted by the FBI?
That's what he told me, that the gentleman who wanted to talk to him, who came along, was FBI agent. That's what he told me.
Well, when did he tell you about this?
After living with Robert for a while, we moved on our own when Lee found a job. And one afternoon, some gentleman came, knock on the door.
And this is Robert Oswald, his brother. You're saying living with Robert?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And Lee went outside and talked with this man, and when he came back, he told me that was the FBI were bugging him, asking questions about, Soviet Union, things like that.
What was Lee's reaction? How did he appear to you when he came back in?
Well, he was very, not upset, but quite angry about. He told me that it would be very difficult for him to find a job or keep a job if they keep bugging him.
How many agents came to the house?
I do not really recall, maybe one or two.
But you were home at the time. You were there.
Yes, I was busy in the kitchen.
Did they come to the door and ring the doorbell or knock?
I don't recall right now. They probably have.
Were they requested to come inside, or did they ask to speak to Lee outside?
I do not know what they said because I do not speak English. So whose initiative was about going outside to speak in the house, I do not know.
And where did they speak?
Outside.
In what, a driveway, a sidewalk, front yard?
On the sidewalk, I believe.
Okay. And how long did this meeting take place?
It was quite a long time. I assume by now maybe 30, 40 minutes, maybe an hour.